4 broken desks, 3 suspended students, 2 panicked parents, and 1 viral video that changed everything. My name is Sarah Chen, and this is how I became the first teacher in Lincoln Middle School history to physically escort troublemakers to the principal's office using nothing but a piece of chalk and 15 years of judo training. The sound of that chalk hitting Marcus Rivera's forehead still echoes in my mind like a perfectly executed technique. Even now, 6 weeks later, I can still hear Tyler Brooks's shocked gasp when he realized his new target wasn't going to be another teacher casualty. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me rewind exactly 43 minutes to 4th period English, when Tyler Brooks and his crew decided to test the quiet Asian teacher who looked like she'd never raised her voice, let alone her hand in self-defense. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in San Francisco's Richmond district, I learned early that appearances could be deceiving. At age 7, while other kids were playing video games, I was learning to fall properly on the mats at Golden Gate Judo Academy. My father, David Chen, stood at 5 feet 6 inches and weighed barely 140 pounds. But in 1988, he came within 1 match of making the Olympic team. 1 match that haunted our family dinner conversations for decades. The dojo smelled like sweat, hope, and dreams deferred. Dad never pushed me into judo, but when playground bullies started targeting me for my thick glasses and quiet demeanor, he made a simple observation. Sarah, you have 2 choices in this world. You can learn to be invisible, or you can learn to be unstoppable. Invisible gets you through elementary school. Unstoppable gets you through life. That was the day I traded my after-school art classes for afternoon training sessions that would reshape everything I thought I knew about strength. Master Tanaka, our head instructor, was a 70-year-old Japanese immigrant who spoke in whispers but moved like lightning. He had this way of teaching that made you discover your own power rather than simply showing it to you. Judo is not about fighting, he would say, adjusting my grip on my training partner's GI. Judo is about understanding balance, timing, and the moment when someone gives you their energy to redirect. I was too young to understand the philosophy then, but my body absorbed the lessons like a sponge. By age 12, I was competing at the state level. The tournament circuit became my second home, traveling every weekend to gyms and community centers across California. Other kids collected Pokemon cards. I collected medals and trophies. But more importantly, I collected confidence. That shy girl with thick glasses started walking differently, talking differently, existing differently in the world. When high school bullies tried their intimidation tactics, they found themselves gently but firmly encouraged to reconsider their choices. Word spread quickly that Sarah Chen was not someone to mess with, even though nobody ever saw me actually fight. The real test came during my junior year at Washington High School. Derek Martinez, a senior football player who thought his scholarship prospects made him untouchable, decided to make my life miserable. It started small, knocking books out of my hands, making crude comments about Asian girls, that typical ignorant behavior that adults somehow always manage to miss. The escalation was predictable, Derek getting bolder as I continued to ignore him, until the day he cornered me in an empty hallway and grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. What happened next lasted exactly 4 seconds. Derek found himself face down on the linoleum with his arm twisted at an angle that made further aggression impossible. I didn't hurt him, just controlled him completely until a teacher arrived. The incident report described it as, "Mutual altercation resolved quickly," but Derek never bothered me again. More importantly, he never bothered anyone again. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones that happen once. College at Ohio State was supposed to be my escape from the martial arts world. I wanted to focus on literature, on teaching, on building a normal life that didn't revolve around throws and submissions. But habits formed over 15 years don't disappear easily. I found myself at the campus recreation center, working out with the judo club just to stay in shape. Before I knew it, I was coaching beginners, then competing again, then earning my 2nd degree black belt while simultaneously working on my education degree. My mother, Linda, worked as a school counselor and had spent decades watching teachers struggle with classroom management. "The kids aren't really bad," she would tell me over dinner during my student teaching semester. "They're just testing boundaries, looking for adults who will actually stand firm." The problem is that most adults either become dictators or doormats. There's a third option, but it requires confidence that most people simply don't possess. She was talking about the space between authority and aggression, that sweet spot where respect is earned rather than demanded. Student teaching at Jefferson Elementary was a revelation. Third graders who terrified their previous teachers responded to my quiet confidence with curiosity rather than rebellion. I never had to raise my voice, never had to write names on the board, never had to send anyone to the principal's office. The kids sensed something different about me, some invisible boundary that made them want to stay within acceptable limits. My supervising teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called it a natural gift for classroom management. I called it 15 years of learning to project calm strength. But elementary school is vastly different from middle school. Eighth graders are a different species entirely, caught between childhood and adolescence, testing every boundary with the energy of people who have nothing to lose. When I accepted the position at Lincoln Middle School, my father's parting advice was simple and direct. Remember, kiddo, Judo principles work in every situation. Stay centered, read your opponent's energy, and never let them know what you're capable of until the moment you choose to show them. Lincoln Middle School sat in the heart of Columbus like a fortress built to contain chaos. The building itself told stories of decades of budget cuts and administrative turnover. Paint peeled from hallway walls, ceiling tiles bore mysterious stains, and the smell of industrial disinfectant couldn't quite mask the underlying scent of institutional despair. This was where teachers came to prove themselves or to have their dreams systematically destroyed by children who sensed weakness like sharks smelling blood in the water. My first day at Lincoln Middle School started at 6:30 in the morning with coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in a chemistry lab and the sound of custodial staff discussing which classrooms had been vandalized over the weekend. Room 237 became my domain, a rectangle of faded motivational posters and mismatched desks that previous teachers had arranged and rearranged in desperate attempts to find some magical configuration that would promote learning over chaos. The warning signs were immediate and unmistakable. During first period, I watched Tyler Brooks enter my classroom like a predator surveying new territory. He was tall for an 8th grader, probably close to 6 feet, with the kind of swagger that comes from years of adults backing down rather than confronting him. His entourage followed behind him like disciples, Marcus Rivera and Devin Walsh flanking him on either side while Jessica Kim brought up the rear with her phone already recording whatever entertainment was about to unfold. Tyler chose the back corner seat, not because he wanted to avoid attention, but because it gave him the best vantage point to orchestrate disruption while maintaining plausible deniability. I recognized the strategy immediately. It was the same positioning philosophy we used in judo competitions, controlling space and angles to maximize your advantage while minimizing your opponent's options. The difference was that Tyler thought he was the only one in the room who understood tactical positioning. The first week passed in a series of escalating tests. Tyler would arrive exactly 30 seconds after the bell, making just enough noise to disrupt my opening remarks without technically being late. He perfected the art of the audible whisper, making comments just loud enough for his friends to hear and laugh at, but just quiet enough that confronting him would make me look petty. When I assigned group work, he would sabotage his team's efforts while maintaining the appearance of participation. When I called on him directly, he would respond with technically correct, but deliberately unhelpful answers, delivered with a smirk that challenged me to do something about his attitude. Marcus Rivera was Tyler's primary lieutenant, a stocky kid with quick hands and quicker excuses. He specialized in the destruction of classroom materials, breaking pencils, tearing pages, knocking over supplies with movements that always appeared accidental but happened with suspicious frequency. Devin Walsh played the role of audience, laughing loudly at Tyler's disruptions and providing the social reinforcement that kept the performance going. Jessica Kim documented everything, her phone capturing moments that would later be edited and shared to make any teacher response look unreasonable or excessive. The other students in the class fell into 3 categories. There were the scared ones, kids who kept their heads down and tried to become invisible whenever Tyler's attention swept the room. There were the desperate ones, attempting to curry favor with the bullies by laughing at their jokes or participating in their schemes. And there were the resentful ones, students who actually wanted to learn but found themselves trapped in an environment where education took a back seat to Tyler's entertainment schedule. Emma Rodriguez, the other new teacher in the building, tried to prepare me during our second week. We were eating lunch in the teacher's lounge, a room that felt like a support group meeting for combat veterans. Tyler Brooks has made 4 teachers quit in the past 3 years, she told me, stirring her yogurt with mechanical precision. The administration talks a good game about supporting us, but when push comes to shove, they're more worried about angry parents and potential lawsuits than they are about maintaining classroom order. Mrs. Grace Thompson, a 30-year veteran who taught across the hall, overheard our conversation and decided to add her perspective. "That boy isn't evil," she said, looking up from her stack of papers to grade. "He's damaged goods from a broken home, and he's learned that chaos gives him control. His father's in prison, his mother works 3 jobs, and his grandmother, who's supposed to be watching him, has dementia. Tyler's not acting out because he's mean. He's acting out because disruption is the only power he has in a world that's completely powerless." The psychology made sense, but understanding Tyler's motivation didn't solve my immediate problem. Every day brought new challenges to my authority, new tests of my resolve, new attempts to provoke a reaction that would either establish his dominance or give him ammunition to use against me. He was probing for weaknesses, looking for the exact pressure point that would make me lose my composure and provide him with the viral content he craved. The pattern escalated during the 3rd week. Tyler discovered that I wore contact lenses and began making elaborate productions of asking me to read things from across the room, feigning concern about my eyesight, while really mocking what he perceived as a disability. When I started writing assignments on the whiteboard, he would squint dramatically and ask his friends if they could make out what the blind lady was trying to teach them. The mockery was subtle enough that administrative intervention would have seemed like an overreaction, but persistent enough to undermine my credibility with every class period. Marcus, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rivera escalated to physical sabotage, loosening the legs on my desk chair so that it would wobble whenever I sat down. He learned my routine and would time his disruptions to coincide with moments when I was most vulnerable, like when I was helping individual students or writing on the board with my back turned. Devin Walsh discovered that certain combinations of words would trigger the voice-to-text function on my computer, leading to random phrases appearing on my screen during presentations. Jessica Kim began timing my movements and reactions, building a profile of my habits and responses that she shared with the others like intelligence reports. The breaking point approached during our 4th week together. I had assigned a creative writing project about personal heroes, hoping to engage the students with something meaningful and relevant to their lives. Most of the class embraced the assignment enthusiastically, sharing stories about family members, athletes, historical figures, and fictional characters who inspired them. But Tyler saw an opportunity for a different kind of performance. His essay, read aloud during our sharing session, was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive mockery, disguised as compliance. He had written about his hero teacher who was brave enough to wear glasses in public, and inspiring because she never gave up, even when students could tell she wanted to cry. The words were technically appropriate, but the delivery was pure theater, performed with exaggerated sincerity that had his crew suppressing laughter, while the rest of the class shifted uncomfortably in their seats. I maintained my composure during his presentation, even offered genuine feedback about his writing mechanics and structure. But I could feel something shifting inside me, some long-dormant part of my personality that had been dormant since my competitive judo days. Tyler must have sensed it too, because his attacks became more brazen, more direct, more personal in the days that followed. What Tyler Brooks and his crew didn't know was that their new English teacher had spent the better part of 15 years studying human behavior through the lens of physical confrontation. Every movement Tyler made, every tactical decision he employed, every psychological pressure he applied was familiar territory to me. I had seen these same patterns played out on competition mats across 3 states, where the stakes were medals and rankings rather than classroom control, but where the fundamental dynamics remained exactly the same. In Judo, we have a concept called kuzushi, which translates roughly to breaking your opponent's balance before attempting a throw. Tyler was a master of educational kuzushi, systematically undermining my equilibrium through carefully timed disruptions, calculated disrespect, and social manipulation that kept me constantly off balance. What he didn't realize was that I had spent years learning to recognize these tactics and, more importantly, learning to maintain my center while appearing vulnerable. My competitive record was something I had deliberately kept hidden from my teaching colleagues. Three-time Ohio State champion at the high school level, two-time Midwest regional champion in college, and ranked 7th nationally in my weight division during my senior year at Ohio State. I had competed against Olympic hopefuls, trained with national team members, and spent countless hours studying video footage of international competitors to understand their strategies and weaknesses. The mental discipline required for high-level judo competition translates directly to classroom management, but it's a translation that requires careful calibration. The difference between a judo match and a classroom confrontation is consent. On the mat, both competitors agree to engage in physical combat within established rules and under the supervision of trained referees. In a classroom, any physical contact between teacher and student creates immediate legal, professional, and ethical complications that can destroy careers and lives. My years of competition had taught me to read aggression, anticipate attacks, and respond with devastating efficiency, but my years of teacher training had taught me that those skills were absolutely forbidden in my new professional environment. Tyler's psychological profile was becoming clearer with each passing day. He operated like a strategic fighter, probing for weaknesses while maintaining defensive positioning that protected him from counterattack. His choice to sit in the back corner wasn't random. It gave him maximum visibility of the entire classroom while minimizing my ability to approach him without obvious intent. His timing of disruptions followed patterns I recognized from studying competition footage, attacking during moments of transition when his target was most vulnerable and least able to respond effectively. Marcus Rivera functioned as Tyler's primary training partner, the loyal sparring partner who helped him refine his techniques and provided backup when situations escalated beyond his individual capabilities. Marcus lacked Tyler's strategic thinking but possessed better reflexes and more natural aggression, making him dangerous in a different way. He was the kind of fighter who would charge forward without thinking, relying on momentum and surprise rather than technique and positioning. Devin Walsh played the role I had seen countless times in team training environments, the enthusiastic student who amplified his teacher's energy and provided social reinforcement for increasingly risky behavior. Devin was Tyler's audience, the validation that made the performance worthwhile. Without Devin's laughter and admiration, Tyler's disruptions would lose their social currency and become simple rule violations, rather than entertaining spectacles. Jessica Kim represented the most sophisticated element of their operation. The documentarian whose recording and sharing capabilities transformed classroom incidents into social media content. She understood that modern conflicts extend far beyond their immediate physical boundaries, that public perception and viral distribution could determine winners and losers long after the original confrontation ended. Jessica was building Tyler's highlight reel while simultaneously creating evidence that could be edited to support whatever narrative served their purposes. My father had warned me about opponents like Tyler during my competitive years. Some fighters are naturally gifted, he had told me after a particularly difficult tournament where I faced an opponent who seemed to anticipate my every move. They read body language, understand timing, and possess an intuitive grasp of psychological warfare that can't be taught. The mistake most people make is trying to outfight these opponents on their terms. The key is recognizing that their greatest strength can become their greatest weakness if you understand how to redirect it. Tyler's greatest strength was his ability to operate within the margins of acceptable behavior, pushing boundaries without crossing lines that would trigger immediate administrative consequences. He had perfected the art of plausible deniability, creating situations where his victims looked unreasonable for complaining about behavior that appeared harmless to outside observers. This was precisely the kind of strategic thinking that made him dangerous. But it was also the kind of rigid, tactical approach that could be exploited by someone who understood his patterns. The revelation that changed my entire perspective came during a faculty meeting in our 5th week together. Principal Williams was discussing the upcoming parent-teacher conferences when she mentioned Tyler's family situation in more detail. His father wasn't just absent. He was serving a 15-year sentence for armed robbery and assault. His mother worked double shifts at 2 different factories to keep the family afloat, leaving Tyler's care to his paternal grandmother, who was in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease and frequently forgot that she was supposed to be supervising a teenager. Tyler wasn't just acting out for entertainment or social status. He was demonstrating the only form of control he had ever learned to exercise. In a world where every adult authority figure had either abandoned him, failed him or become incapacitated, Tyler had discovered that chaos gave him power. His classroom disruptions weren't random teenage rebellion. They were carefully orchestrated demonstrations of his ability to control his environment and the people in it. This understanding should have generated sympathy, and to some extent it did. But it also clarified the stakes of our ongoing conflict. Tyler wasn't going to respond to traditional disciplinary measures because traditional authority had never provided him with stability or safety. He would continue escalating his behavior until he encountered someone who could match his strategic thinking while possessing the strength to establish genuine boundaries. Unfortunately for Tyler, his tactical probing had awakened something in me that I had spent years learning to control. My judo training had taught me that every opponent reveals their strategy through their attacks. Tyler's pattern was becoming predictable. His escalation following a timeline that suggested he was building toward something more dramatic than his usual disruptions. The question wasn't whether he would eventually cross a line that demanded direct response. The question was whether I would be ready when that moment arrived, and whether I could handle the situation without destroying either of our futures in the process. The real reason I became a teacher had nothing to do with love of literature or passion for education, though those things developed along the way. I became a teacher because of a moment that happened when I was 16 years old. Standing in the emergency room of San Francisco General Hospital, watching my father explain to a police officer why he had just thrown a grown man through a plate glass window. The man my father had thrown was named Robert Henley, a substitute teacher at my high school who had been sexually harassing female students for months. The administration knew about the complaints but had done nothing beyond moving him from classroom to classroom, treating the problem like a scheduling inconvenience rather than a predatory threat. When Henley cornered my friend Maya Patel in an empty classroom after school and put his hands on her, she came to me crying and terrified, convinced that reporting him would only make things worse. I told my father that night over dinner, expecting him to advise me to encourage Maya to speak with her parents or the principal. Instead, he set down his chopsticks and asked me 3 questions that would reshape my understanding of responsibility forever. Is this man in a position of power over vulnerable people? Has the system already demonstrated that it won't protect those people? And do you have the ability to stop him? When I answered yes to all 3 questions, he nodded once and said, "Then we have work to do." My father didn't go to the school looking for a fight. He went looking for a conversation, hoping to resolve the situation through appropriate channels and proper procedures. But when he found Henley in the parking lot after school, approaching another female student with obvious intent, the conversation became physical very quickly. What witnesses described as a, quote, brief altercation was actually my father demonstrating 15 years of competitive judo training in approximately 4 seconds, ending with Henley unconscious on the pavement and an ambulance being called for what appeared to be serious injuries. The legal aftermath was complicated but brief. Security cameras had captured Henley's approach toward the student, and Maya's testimony about her earlier assault provided context that made my father's intervention look like heroic protection rather than criminal assault. Henley was charged with multiple counts of sexual misconduct, permanently banned from working in education, and quietly settled several civil lawsuits before disappearing from San Francisco entirely. My father received a commendation from the police, department, and a formal letter of gratitude from the school district. But the real impact of that incident wasn't legal or professional. It was personal and philosophical. Watching my father take direct action to protect vulnerable people taught me that sometimes the system fails, and when it fails, individuals with the ability to act have a moral obligation to step forward. The skills we develop aren't just for our own benefit. They're tools we hold in trust for moments when they can serve a larger purpose. Maya Patel went on to become a successful attorney, specializing in Title IX violations and sexual harassment cases. She credits my father's intervention with saving not just her high school experience but her entire faith in the possibility that adults would actually protect children when protection was needed. At my college graduation, she gave me a card that I still carry in my wallet. "Sarah," it read, "your father showed me that strength without compassion is brutality, but compassion without strength is impotence. Thank you for having a family that understands the difference." This was the lens through which I viewed Tyler Brooks and his systematic campaign against not just me, but the entire learning environment I was responsible for creating. Tyler wasn't just disrupting my lessons. He was demonstrating to 25 other students that adults in positions of authority were powerless to protect them from predatory behavior. Every day that his actions went without meaningful consequence was another day that vulnerable students learned not to trust the system or the people who claimed to represent it. Emma Rodriguez confided in me during our 6th week that Tyler's behavior had escalated beyond my classroom. He had been following her to her car after school, making comments about her appearance and asking personal questions about her living situation and relationship status. When she reported these incidents to Principal Williams, she was told to, quote, document everything and, quote, avoid being alone with the student, advice that felt more like victim blaming than institutional support. Mrs. Thompson shared her own Tyler Brooks stories during a particularly frustrating faculty meeting. He had discovered that she took medication for anxiety and had begun making loud comments about crazy teachers whenever she was within earshot. He had researched her personal life online and learned about her recent divorce, leading to carefully timed questions about broken homes and damaged adults that appeared academic on the surface but carried obvious personal implications. The pattern was becoming clear. Tyler wasn't just a disruptive student. He was a systematic predator who had learned to weaponize the educational environment against the adults who worked there. His tactics were sophisticated, his timing was precise, and his understanding of administrative limitations was comprehensive. He operated like someone who had studied institutional vulnerabilities and developed strategies specifically designed to exploit them. What made Tyler particularly dangerous was his ability to recruit accomplices from the student body. Marcus, Devin, and Jessica weren't just friends following their leader. They were active participants in a campaign that was teaching an entire generation of children that aggression wins, that cruelty is entertaining, and that adults are fundamentally powerless to maintain order or protect the innocent. Every student who laughed at Tyler's performances, every child who remained silent during his attacks, every young person who witnessed his success was receiving an education in predatory behavior that would shape their understanding of power dynamics for years to come. This was bigger than classroom management or student discipline. This was about whether the next generation of human beings would learn to respect authority, protect the vulnerable, and participate in civilized society, or whether they would learn that might makes right, that cruelty is rewarded, and that institutions exist to be exploited rather than supported. Tyler Brooks wasn't just threatening my career, he was threatening the social contract that makes education possible. My judo training had taught me that the most dangerous opponents are the ones who understand that physical confrontation is just one element of a larger strategic campaign. Tyler understood this instinctively, using psychological warfare, social manipulation, and institutional limitations to achieve dominance without ever technically crossing lines that would trigger immediate consequences. He was fighting a war while everyone else was playing by rules he had no intention of following. The moment was approaching when I would have to decide whether to continue absorbing his attacks and hoping the system would eventually protect me, or whether to demonstrate that some lines cannot be crossed without immediate and decisive consequences. The morning of October 15th dawned gray and oppressive, with the kind of heavy clouds that seemed to press down on Lincoln Middle School like a weight threatening to crush everything beneath it. I arrived at my classroom earlier than usual, drawn by an instinct I couldn't quite name but had learned to trust during my years of competition. Something was different in the air that day, a tension that reminded me of the moments before major tournaments when you could sense that everything was about to change irrevocably. Tyler Brooks entered my classroom that morning with an energy I had never seen before, his usual calculated swagger replaced by something more urgent and desperate. There was a predatory focus in his movements that reminded me of fighters who had trained extensively for a specific opponent, competitors who had studied video footage and developed strategies tailored for one crucial confrontation. His crew followed behind him like soldiers preparing for their final assault, their expressions carrying a seriousness that made my martial arts instincts sharpen automatically. The first indication that today would be fundamentally different came during second period, when Tyler arrived with a backpack containing supplies that had absolutely nothing to do with English literature. I watched him distribute items to Marcus Rivera, Devin Walsh, and Jessica Kim with the precision of a general equipping his troops for battle. Pencils were broken into specific lengths, erasers were modified into projectiles, paper clips were bent into aerodynamic shapes, rubber bands were tested for tension and accuracy, and something else that I couldn't quite identify from my position at the front of the room was carefully portioned out among his accomplices. The distribution process was subtle enough that a casual observer might dismiss it as normal teenage fidgeting, but my years of competition had taught me to notice when opponents were preparing weapons and coordinating attack strategies. Every movement Tyler made was deliberate and purposeful, designed to create maximum chaos while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. He was orchestrating something far more sophisticated than his usual disruptions, something that would require the kind of coordinated response I had been training for since childhood. The pattern of escalation that had been building for 7 weeks was clearly reaching its predetermined culmination, and I could feel the weight of every decision I had made since arriving at Lincoln Middle School pressing down on my shoulders like a physical burden. Every moment I had chosen restraint over confrontation, every time I had absorbed Tyler's attacks without responding with force, every instance where I had allowed his behavior to continue unchecked in hopes that administrative intervention would eventually resolve the situation, had led us inexorably to this point. The students in my classroom weren't just witnessing a conflict between a teacher and a disruptive student. They were about to receive a comprehensive education in power dynamics, consequence enforcement, and the difference between genuine authority and mere positional power that would shape their understanding of leadership, respect, and personal responsibility for years to come. What happened in the next hour would determine whether they learned that adults were capable of protecting learning environments and vulnerable individuals, or whether they would conclude that institutions were fundamentally powerless against determined aggression. Third period brought the first direct assault in what would become Tyler's final campaign against civilized behavior in my classroom. He had somehow discovered that I suffered from a mild but noticeable allergy to certain types of chalk dust, information I had mentioned casually during a conversation about classroom supplies with Mrs. Thompson several weeks earlier. Armed with this intelligence about my physical vulnerability, Tyler began systematically grinding pieces of chalk into fine powder and blowing the resulting dust in my direction whenever I turned to write assignments or instructions on the whiteboard. The allergic reaction wasn't severe enough to constitute a medical emergency, but it was significant enough to make my eyes water continuously, my voice become progressively hoarse, and my skin develop red patches wherever the chalk dust made direct contact. More importantly than the physical discomfort was the psychological message Tyler was sending to every student in the classroom. He was demonstrating that he possessed the power to inflict suffering on an adult authority figure while maintaining complete plausible deniability about his actions. Marcus Rivera and Devin Walsh joined the coordinated harassment campaign during the same period, creating a systematically orchestrated pattern of chalk-related abuse that transformed my classroom from a learning environment into a battlefield where education became impossible and survival became the primary concern. They would deliberately drop pieces of chalk on the floor and step on them with calculated force, creating clouds of dust that filled the air and made several students cough, sneeze, and complain about respiratory discomfort. The destruction was methodical and comprehensive. They would break fresh pieces of chalk into small fragments and flick them across the room when they thought my attention was focused elsewhere, striking other students and creating an atmosphere of chaos that made meaningful instruction impossible to deliver or receive. The projectiles weren't thrown hard enough to cause injury, but they were launched with sufficient frequency and accuracy to create constant disruption and demonstrate Tyler's crew's complete disregard for educational processes. Jessica Kim documented every moment of the harassment campaign with her smartphone, capturing my increasingly frustrated attempts to maintain classroom order, while Tyler's team systematically destroyed the learning environment through what appeared to outside observers as innocent interaction with standard classroom supplies. She was constructing a narrative of a teacher losing control and becoming increasingly erratic in her responses to normal student behavior, creating content that would make any administrative intervention look like overreaction while portraying Tyler and his accomplices as innocent victims of an unstable adult. The sophistication of their coordinated strategy was both impressive and terrifying in equal measure. Tyler had clearly spent considerable time studying not just my reactions and behavioral patterns, but also the legal and administrative frameworks that govern teacher-student interactions. He understood that modern educational environments were designed to protect students from adult authority rather than protecting learning environments from student disruption, and he was systematically exploiting those protections to wage psychological warfare against someone whose professional obligations prevented effective retaliation. The psychological pressure intensified dramatically during our lunch break. When Emma Rodriguez found me in the teacher's lounge looking exhausted and defeated, my clothing covered in chalk dust and my voice reduced to barely above a Vensric whisper from the ongoing allergic reaction. The physical symptoms were manageable, but the emotional toll of being systematically attacked while professionally prohibited from defending myself effectively was beginning to undermine my confidence and my commitment to continuing in the teaching profession. Sarah, they're planning something major for fourth period. Emma warned me, her own recent experiences with Tyler's escalation tactics making her particularly sensitive to the warning signs that preceded his most destructive episodes. I overheard them talking about something called Operation Snowstorm in the hallway between classes. I don't know exactly what that means, but given everything that's been happening, I don't think it's anything good for you or your students. Mrs. Grace Thompson overheard our conversation and shared her own growing concerns about Tyler's recent behavioral changes and the increasing intensity of his attacks on adult authority figures throughout the building. "That boy has been different this entire week," she observed, looking up from her stack of papers with genuine worry evident in her expression. "He's more focused, more determined, more purposeful in his disruptions." In 30 years of teaching, I've learned to recognize when a student is building up to something dramatic and potentially dangerous. Tyler Brooks is a powder keg with a very short fuse, and I believe today might be the day it finally explodes. Principal Williams was unfortunately scheduled to be in district meetings all afternoon, making her unavailable for consultation, support, or immediate intervention if the situation in my classroom deteriorated beyond my ability to manage independently. The school resource officer was dealing with a complex incident in the parking lot involving students from a rival school who had apparently come to Lincoln looking for fights, leaving the building's security coverage significantly reduced during what was clearly going to be a critical period. The guidance counselors were administering state-mandated standardized tests to 7th grade students, a process that required their complete attention and made them unavailable for crisis intervention or behavioral support. The assistant principal was conducting parent conferences about college preparatory programs, meetings that had been scheduled months in advance and couldn't be postponed without creating significant political problems for the administration. I was effectively on my own, facing a coordinated assault from 4 students who had spent weeks studying my weaknesses, developing strategies specifically designed to push me beyond my breaking point, and preparing for what appeared to be their final attempt to demonstrate that adult authority was powerless against determined teenage aggression. The isolation was both frightening and clarifying, forcing me to confront the reality that protecting my classroom and my students would depend entirely on my own skills, judgment, and willingness to accept whatever consequences might result from taking decisive action. Fourth period English began at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon, precisely 43 minutes before the incident that would fundamentally change everything about my teaching career, Tyler's educational experience, and the entire culture of Lincoln Middle School. Tyler and his crew entered my classroom like gladiators entering the Colosseum, their expressions serious and determined in a way that made every other student in the room unconsciously shift toward the edges of the space and away from what their teenage intuition recognized as an impending collision. The 21 other students in the classroom sensed immediately that something significant and potentially dangerous was about to happen, their adolescent survival instincts picking up on the tension that filled the air like electricity before a violent thunderstorm. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, notebooks were closed and moved to safety, and backpacks were positioned as potential barriers between their owners and whatever chaos was about to erupt in the front of the room. I had originally planned a lesson on conflict resolution in literature, an irony that wasn't lost on me as I watched Tyler arrange his carefully prepared supplies on his desk with military precision and tactical awareness. We were supposed to analyze how characters in classic short stories handle disputes and disagreements, discussing the differences between productive confrontation that leads to understanding and destructive aggression that escalates into violence. Instead, we were about to receive a real-world demonstration of what happens when systematic harassment encounters someone who possesses both the skills and the motivation to end such behavior permanently. The first phase of Tyler's carefully orchestrated assault began innocuously enough, disguised as normal classroom participation that would appear completely appropriate to any outside observer who wasn't aware of the context and history behind his actions. He raised his hand during my opening remarks about the day's learning objectives, something he had never done before in 7 weeks of classes, catching me off guard with what appeared to be genuine academic engagement. When I called on him, Expecting some form of verbal disruption or sarcastic commentary designed to undermine my authority, Tyler instead asked what seemed to be a legitimate question about the assignment that forced me to turn my back to the class while I wrote clarifying information and additional instructions on the whiteboard. The question itself was sophisticated and thoughtful, demonstrating that Tyler possessed considerably more intellectual capability than his disruptive behavior had previously suggested. What I didn't realize until later was that Tyler's question had been carefully crafted to accomplish two specific tactical objectives. First, it forced me to turn away from the class and focus my attention on the whiteboard, creating the perfect opportunity for his crew to launch their coordinated attack while my ability to observe and respond was compromised. Second, it established him as an engaged student asking reasonable questions, creating plausible deniability for whatever chaos was about to follow. The moment I turned around to face the whiteboard and began writing the additional information Tyler had requested, the bombardment began with devastating effectiveness and perfect coordination. Chalk dust filled the air like snow in a blizzard as Tyler, Marcus, and Devin launched precisely timed volleys of crushed chalk powder in my direction from 3 different angles, creating a crossfire pattern that made escape or evasion impossible. They had prepared their ammunition with scientific precision, grinding dozens of pieces of chalk into fine powder that would hang in the air for maximum duration and create choking clouds that made breathing difficult for everyone in the classroom. The powder was contained in small paper packets that could be opened and launched quickly, ensuring that maximum amounts of dust would be released simultaneously and create the most dramatic visual and respiratory impact possible. My allergic reaction was immediate, severe, and exactly what Tyler had calculated would happen based on his previous observations of my responses to chalk dust exposure. My eyes began streaming tears that made it impossible to see clearly, my throat closed up until speaking became painful, and my voice was reduced to a harsh whisper, and my skin started itching and developing red welts wherever the chalk dust made direct contact. But more significant than the physical discomfort was the psychological impact of the deliberate assault and the message it sent to every person in the classroom. 25 students were watching to see how I would respond to this coordinated attack on my person and my authority, and my reaction would determine not just the immediate outcome of this confrontation, but the entire future of order, respect, and educational effectiveness in my classroom and potentially throughout the building. Students began coughing, sneezing, and covering their faces with their shirts or sleeves as the bonjour chalk dust spread throughout the room, creating a fog that reduced visibility and made the air quality genuinely dangerous for anyone with respiratory sensitivities. Several students stood up and moved toward the windows, trying to escape the worst of the dust cloud and find cleaner air to breathe. The classroom was rapidly becoming uninhabitable, exactly as Tyler had planned. "Tyler Brooks," I managed to say through my constricted throat, my voice barely audible above the sounds of students coughing and moving around the room in search of breathable air. "You need to stop this behavior immediately." The words came out weak and ineffective, lacking the authority and strength that would be necessary to end this assault and restore order to the learning environment. Tyler's response was to stand up slowly and deliberately, displaying his full height and teenage confidence for maximum intimidation effect, while demonstrating to every witness that he felt no fear or respect for my authority. He held a piece of chalk in each hand like weapons, his expression carrying the kind of cold satisfaction that comes from finally achieving a long-sought goal and proving a point that had required weeks of preparation to demonstrate effectively. "Stop what, Miss Chen?" Tyler asked, his voice deliberately loud and clear so that every student in the classroom could hear his challenge to my authority. "I'm just participating in your lesson about conflict resolution. This is how conflicts get resolved in the real world, isn't it? The strong take what they want from the weak, and the weak either fight back or accept their place." Marcus Rivera and Devin Walsh flanked Tyler on either side, like bodyguards or military escorts, their own pieces of chalk held ready for launch, while their expressions showed a mixture of excitement and nervousness about how far this confrontation would ultimately escalate. They had committed themselves to following Tyler's leadership regardless of consequences, and their loyalty was about to be tested in ways they couldn't possibly have anticipated. Jessica Kim had her smartphone out and actively recording everything that was happening, capturing what she expected to be my complete breakdown and Tyler's triumphant demonstration of dominance over adult authority. The video she was creating would indeed become viral content, but not in the way any of them had expected or planned. Instead of documenting a teacher's humiliation, she was about to record a masterclass in consequence enforcement. The other 21 students pressed themselves against the walls and toward the back of the classroom, some looking genuinely scared by the aggressive energy that was filling the room, others appearing excited by the drama and anticipation of what might happen next. All of them were watching with rapt attention to see what would occur when an unstoppable force met what appeared to be a very movable object. The mathematics of the situation appeared simple and overwhelming from any conventional perspective. 3 athletic 8th-grade boys, each weighing between 140 and 160 pounds, positioned strategically around the classroom with projectile weapons and coordinated attack patterns. One small Asian woman, 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighing 120 pounds, suffering from an allergic reaction that compromised her vision and breathing, apparently helpless to stop their systematic assault on her person and authority. Tyler held every apparent advantage and had every reason to feel confident about the ultimate outcome of this confrontation. He possessed superior numbers, better positioning, environmental weapons, audience support, and legal protections that would make any physical response from me appear to be adult aggression against innocent children. From his perspective, victory was inevitable, and humiliation was the only possible outcome for someone who had dared to resist his authority for 7 consecutive weeks. What Tyler Brooks didn't know, couldn't have known, and was about to discover in the most dramatic way possible was that his new English teacher had spent 15 years of her life studying scenarios exactly like this one, with the kind of dedication and intensity that produces Olympic-level competitors. Every element of Tyler's assault had direct analogies in my competition experience. From the coordinated attack patterns to the psychological intimidation tactics, to the presence of an audience that would judge the winner and loser based on who demonstrated superior skill and determination. In Judo, we train constantly for situations where multiple opponents attack simultaneously, where environmental factors create additional challenges and complications, where victory requires not just technical skill, but strategic thinking and perfect timing under extreme pressure. Every technique I had learned, every drill I had practiced, every competition I had entered, had been preparation for moments when peaceful resolution becomes impossible, and controlled force becomes the only language that aggressive opponents can understand. The second coordinated volley of chalk dust came from 3 directions simultaneously, launched with military precision and designed to create maximum confusion while depleting my ability to see, breathe, or respond effectively to continued attacks. This was Tyler's attempt to finish the confrontation quickly and decisively, overwhelming me with superior firepower before I could mount any kind of organized resistance or call for administrative intervention. But as the white powder filled the air around me like a cloud of chemical warfare, something fundamental and irreversible shifted in my consciousness and my approach to this situation. The mild-mannered English teacher who had been absorbing systematic abuse for 7 weeks without meaningful retaliation disappeared completely, replaced by the competitor who had faced down Olympic hopefuls and never backed down from a challenge regardless of the odds or the stakes involved. My breathing steadied automatically, drawing on years of meditation and stress management training that had been designed specifically for high-pressure situations where clear thinking and precise execution meant the difference between victory and defeat. My vision cleared despite the tears and chalk dust, my focus narrowing to encompass only the immediate threats and the tactical options available for neutralizing them without causing unnecessary harm. My body automatically assumed the balanced stance that had served me well in countless tournaments and training sessions. Weight distributed optimally between both feet, hands positioned for maximum defensive and offensive flexibility, center of gravity lowered for stability and explosive movement potential. This was the posture of someone who understood violence as a language and was prepared to speak it fluently when peaceful communication proved inadequate. Tyler recognized the change in my demeanor immediately, his expression shifting from confident satisfaction to uncertain concern as he watched me transform from victim to threat in the space of a single heartbeat. He had spent weeks studying my reactions and responses, learning my patterns and apparent weaknesses, but he had never seen this version of Sarah Chen before. This was the version that had earned 3 state championships and a national ranking. The version that understood combat as both art and science. "Last chance, Tyler," I said, my voice now clear and strong. carrying the kind of absolute authority that comes from complete certainty about what's going to happen next. Put down the chalk, sit down in your seat, and we can still discuss this situation like civilized people who understand that conflicts don't have to escalate to physical confrontation. Continue with this assault, and you're going to learn why attacking someone is always a serious mistake when you don't know what they're truly capable of. The warning was delivered calmly but with unmistakable intent, giving Tyler one final opportunity to de-escalate this confrontation before consequences became inevitable and irreversible. I wanted every witness to understand that I had attempted peaceful resolution, right up until the moment when peaceful resolution became impossible, and that whatever happened next would be the direct result of Tyler's choices rather than my aggression. Tyler's response was both predictable and unfortunate, demonstrating that he had misinterpreted my weeks of restraint as evidence of weakness rather than recognizing it as evidence of strength under control. He laughed, a sound designed to demonstrate his complete lack of respect for my authority and his absolute confidence in his ability to continue this assault without facing any meaningful consequences. "What are you going to do, Miss Chen?" Tyler asked, raising both pieces of chalk above his head like a pitcher preparing to throw fastballs directly at my face. "Call the principal who's not here? Write me up for defending myself against a crazy teacher? Give me detention that my grandmother will excuse because she doesn't understand what's happening? We both know you're completely powerless here. This is my classroom now, and these are my rules." The third volley represented Tyler's fatal miscalculation and the point of no return for this entire confrontation. He threw both pieces of chalk directly at my face with significant force, aiming specifically for my eyes in what constituted clear assault with intent to cause bodily injury. The projectiles were launched with enough velocity to cause serious damage if they found their intended targets, transforming this from harassment into criminal violence. As the pieces of chalk flew toward me through the dusty air, time seemed to slow in the way it always did during important judo matches, when everything depended on split-second timing and technical perfection. My body responded automatically, muscle memory taking over as 15 years of training compressed into a moment of absolute clarity and purpose. I shifted slightly to the left, allowing the first projectile to pass harmlessly through the space where my head had been moments before, while simultaneously raising my right hand to catch the second piece of chalk out of the air with the kind of hand-eye coordination that comes from years of training to react to attacks at competition speed. The catch was clean and effortless, executed with the precision that separates trained athletes from untrained individuals. The successful interception was more than just a defensive technique. It was a psychological weapon that shattered every assumption Tyler and his crew had made about who they were dealing with. 25 students witnessed their teacher pluck a high-speed projectile out of the air, like it was moving in slow motion, demonstrating reflexes and spatial awareness that transformed her from apparent victim into obvious predator in the span of a single heartbeat. Tyler's second piece of chalk, the one I had caught, became the instrument of my response to 7 weeks of systematic harassment, coordinated assault, and deliberate attempts to destroy the learning environment for 25 students who deserved protection from predatory behavior. I drew my arm back and threw the chalk with the precision and controlled force that comes from years of competition-level training, aiming for the center of Tyler's chest, where the impact would be significant but not dangerous. The physics were beautiful and terrible. Tyler's own momentum and aggression, combined with my technical precision and perfect timing, sent the piece of chalk back toward him at twice the speed he had thrown it. The projectile struck him directly in the center of his sternum, with a sharp crack that silenced every sound in the classroom, except for Tyler's shocked gasp as he staggered backward and completely lost his balance. The impact wasn't intended to cause injury, and it didn't, but it was calculated to deliver a message that Tyler would understand immediately, that his systematic campaign of harassment had encountered someone who possessed both the skills and the will to end it permanently. The precise force and placement of my response demonstrated control rather than anger, technique rather than emotion, consequence rather than revenge. Marcus Rivera, seeing his leader stunned and off balance, made the crucial mistake of rushing forward in what he probably thought was a rescue attempt, but which actually constituted a coordinated assault on a teacher by multiple students. His loyalty to Tyler overrode any consideration of consequences, his teenage brain convinced that momentum and numbers would overcome skill and experience if he could just reach me before I had time to prepare for his attack. What happened next lasted approximately 6 seconds but provided every witness with a comprehensive education in applied physics, leverage, and the fundamental difference between trained technique and adolescent aggression. Marcus reached me first, his hands extended to grab my shoulders in what appeared to be an attempt to tackle me or wrestle me to the ground, where his superior size and weight would give him a decisive advantage. Instead of resisting his attack or meeting force with force, I redirected his energy using the fundamental Judo principle called kuzushi, which involves breaking an opponent's balance while using their own momentum against them. The technique requires precise timing and perfect positioning, but when executed correctly, it allows a smaller person to control a larger opponent with minimal effort and maximum effectiveness. As Marcus lunged forward with his full weight committed to the attack, I stepped to the side and slightly forward, positioning myself so that his momentum would carry him past my position while I maintained control of his movement and balance. My left hand guided his right shoulder while my right hand controlled his left arm, creating a steering mechanism that allowed me to direct his energy exactly where I wanted it to go. The specific technique I employed was osotogari, a major outer reaping throw that every first-year judo student learns in theory but which takes years to master at the level of precision required for real-world application against determined opponents. As Marcus passed my position, I swept his supporting leg while simultaneously controlling his upper body, sending him into a controlled fall that looked spectacular but was designed to minimize injury. Marcus found himself airborne for a brief moment, before landing hard on his back with an impact that knocked the wind out of him and left him gasping on the linoleum floor. The throw was executed with textbook precision, demonstrating complete control over his body and his fate, while delivering a lesson about the consequences of attacking trained opponents that he would remember for the rest of his life. Devin Walsh's attack came from my left side approximately 2 seconds after Marcus hit the floor, his approach slightly more cautious after witnessing his friend's sudden and dramatic introduction to basic physics. Devin tried to grab my left arm, perhaps thinking he could control my movement and prevent me from using whatever technique had just neutralized Marcus so effectively and completely. Instead of providing him with the control he sought, Devin's grip on my arm gave me the perfect setup for taiotashi, a body drop throw that uses an opponent's forward momentum to send them flying over an extended leg. The technique requires the opponent to be moving toward you with committed energy, which Devin provided by attempting to grab and control my movement. The execution was flawless and devastating. As Devin grabbed my left arm and pulled me toward him, I stepped across his path with my right leg, maintained my grip on his wrist to control his upper body, and rotated my entire torso to send him sailing over my extended leg and onto the floor next to Marcus. The throw was clean, controlled, and designed to neutralize the threat without causing permanent damage. Both boys lay on the floor in stunned confusion, their aggressive confidence completely evaporated as they struggled to understand what had just happened to them and how their coordinated assault had been turned into a demonstration of their complete helplessness against trained opposition. The speed and precision of their neutralization sent a clear message to every witness about the difference between posturing and actual capability. Tyler, meanwhile, had recovered from the chalk impact and was staring at me with an expression that mixed fear, rage, confusion, and something that might have been grudging respect. The casual arrogance that had characterized his behavior for 7 weeks was completely gone, replaced by the kind of focused attention that comes from suddenly realizing you've made a serious miscalculation about your opponent's capabilities and intentions. He still held pieces of chalk in both hands, but his posture had shifted from aggressive to defensive as he processed the fact that his 2 strongest allies were lying on the floor, and that I was standing calmly in the center of the classroom, completely unharmed and obviously capable of dealing with whatever additional challenges he might present. "This isn't over," Tyler said, his voice lacking the confidence that had carried him through weeks of successful harassment and intimidation. "You can't do this to students. You'll be fired for attacking children. You'll be arrested for assault. My grandmother will sue you for everything you have. Everyone saw what you did, you're finished." The threats were predictable, but delivered without conviction. The words of someone who was beginning to understand that the power dynamic in the room had shifted permanently, and that his previous assumptions about adult weakness and institutional protection were no longer applicable to his situation. "Tyler?" I said, stepping carefully over the prone forms of Marcus and Devin to position myself directly in front of him, close enough that our conversation could be private despite the audience of fascinated students. "This is exactly what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. when you confuse restraint with inability, and when you assume that adults are as helpless as the children you're accustomed to bullying and intimidating. Jessica was still recording with her smartphone, her device capturing every word and movement as Tyler backed away from me until he was pressed against the whiteboard with nowhere left to retreat. The video she was creating would indeed become viral content, but not in the way any of them had expected or intended. Instead of documenting a teacher's breakdown and humiliation, she was recording a masterclass in how predatory behavior gets decisively shut down when it encounters someone who possesses both the skills and the determination to end it permanently. "I gave you 7 weeks and multiple warnings," I continued, my voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority and finality. "I tried every peaceful method available to resolve this situation without resorting to physical force. I documented your harassment, reported your behavior to administrators, attempted to engage you in constructive dialogue, and absorbed your attacks without retaliation in hopes that you would eventually understand that your actions were harming not just me but every student in this classroom." Tyler's breathing was becoming rapid and shallow as he realized that his carefully constructed campaign of intimidation had not only failed but had actually awakened something in me that he was completely unprepared to handle. The swagger and confidence that had sustained him through weeks of successful harassment were evaporating as he confronted the reality that some adults actually possess the skills and will necessary to enforce meaningful consequences for harmful behavior. "You want to throw things at me?" I asked, maintaining eye contact while Tyler pressed himself harder against the whiteboard. "You want to transform my classroom into a battlefield where education becomes impossible and vulnerable students learn that adults are powerless to protect them? You want to demonstrate that might makes right and that aggression always wins against decency and civilization?" The challenge hung in the air like a physical presence, while Tyler struggled with a decision that would determine not just the immediate outcome of this confrontation, but his entire future understanding of power, consequences, and the difference between real strength and adolescent posturing. Every student in the classroom held their breath as Tyler looked down at the chalk still clutched in his hands, then at his friends lying motionless on the floor, then back at me standing calmly in front of him. "Then let's finish this properly and permanently," I said, extending my hand palm up toward Tyler. "Pick up all the chalk you want. Take your best shot. Show me what you've really got. But understand that when you make that choice, you're not attacking a helpless teacher anymore. You're attacking someone who has spent 15 years preparing for exactly this moment, and who understands that sometimes protecting vulnerable people requires demonstrating that harmful behavior will be met with immediate and decisive consequences." Tyler's final mistake was believing that retreat was still an option after weeks of escalating aggression and systematic harassment. Instead of dropping the chalk and accepting that his campaign of intimidation was over, he decided to salvage his reputation with one last desperate assault that would either establish his dominance or provide him with victim status if I responded with what could be characterized as excessive force. He drew both arms back and threw the pieces of chalk simultaneously, putting his full strength behind projectiles aimed directly at my face in what constituted felony assault with intent to cause serious bodily injury. The attack was launched with genuine malice and sufficient force to cause significant damage if the projectiles found their intended targets. My response was instantaneous, decisive, and technically perfect. I deflected the first projectile with my left forearm while catching the second out of the air with my right hand, the movements flowing together so smoothly that they appeared choreographed rather than reactive. But instead of simply neutralizing Tyler's attack, I decided to demonstrate a lesson about consequences that would be remembered by every witness for the rest of their lives. The piece of chalk I had caught became my final response to 7 weeks of systematic harassment, coordinated assault, and deliberate attempts to destroy the learning environment for 25 students who deserved protection from predatory behavior. I drew my arm back and threw the chalk with the precision and controlled force that comes from years of competition-level training, aiming for Tyler's solar plexus where the impact would be significant but not life-threatening. Tyler attempted to dodge, his reflexes finally activated by genuine fear and recognition of immediate danger, but his movement was too late and too slow. The chalk struck him squarely in the center of his chest, with enough force to knock him backward into the whiteboard, where he slumped down in his sitting position with an expression of stunned disbelief and complete defeat. The impact was carefully calculated to be painful but not injurious, designed to deliver an unforgettable message rather than cause lasting physical damage. Tyler would have a bruise for several days and a memory that would last for decades, both serving as reminders that actions have consequences and that some adults actually possess the capability and determination to enforce those consequences when necessary. And that, I announced to the completely silent classroom, is how conflicts get resolved when civilized discourse fails and physical force becomes the only language that aggressive individuals can understand. Tyler Brooks, Marcus Rivera, Devin Walsh, and Jessica Kim, you are going to the principal's office immediately. Not after class, not when it's convenient, not after you've had time to coordinate your stories. Right now. And we're all going together so that there's no confusion about what happened here, why it happened, or who bears responsibility for escalating this situation, to the point where physical intervention became necessary. The march to the principal's office was unlike anything in Lincoln Middle School's institutional memory. I led the procession with Tyler's crew trailing behind me like prisoners of war, while Jessica's smartphone continued recording what had become the most dramatic and consequential footage in the school's recent history. Other teachers looked out of their classrooms as we passed, their expressions ranging from shock to admiration, as they processed the sight of Tyler Brooks looking thoroughly defeated for the first time in his academic career. Students in the hallways stopped their conversations and pressed against lockers to make room for our passage, sensing that they were witnessing something historically significant. Word spread through the building with the speed that only teenage communication networks can achieve, and by the time we reached the administrative offices, a small crowd of curious students and concerned teachers had gathered to witness the aftermath of what was already being called Chalk Day. Principal Williams was in her office reviewing budget reports when we arrived, her expression shifting from mild irritation at the interruption to genuine alarm as she took in the scene. Tyler had a red mark on his forehead where my initial chalk response had struck him. Marcus and Devin both looked disheveled from their encounters with the floor, and Jessica was still recording everything with the dedication of a war correspondent documenting a historic battle. "Miss Chen," Principal Williams said, standing up behind her desk with the kind of careful neutrality that school administrators learn when dealing with situations that could escalate into legal nightmares and public relations disasters. "What exactly has happened here? Why are these students out of class during instructional time? And why do some of them appear to have been involved in some sort of physical altercation?" Tyler Brooks and his crew have been conducting a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation against me for 7 weeks, I replied, my voice calm and professional despite the adrenaline still coursing through my system. Today they escalated their behavior to coordinated physical assault, throwing chalk dust and solid projectiles at my face while creating a hostile environment that made teaching impossible and endangered the health and safety of other students in the classroom. Tyler immediately began protesting, his voice high and desperate as he attempted to control the narrative and position himself as the victim rather than the aggressor. "She attacked us. We were just asking questions about the lesson and she went completely crazy. She threw Marcus and Devin on the floor for no reason. She threw chalk at my face and could have seriously injured me. You have to fire her. This is assault. This is child abuse. You can't let teachers use violence against students." Principal Williams held up her hand for silence while she processed the competing narratives and considered the legal, professional, and public relations implications of whatever had transpired in room 237. The decision she made in the next few minutes would determine not just my professional future, but the entire precedent for how similar situations would be handled throughout the district. "Jessica," Principal Williams said, turning to the student who was still actively recording, "I need you to stop filming immediately and surrender your phone for administrative review. This is now an official investigation into allegations of assault and misconduct. An unauthorized recording of disciplinary proceedings violates district policy and potentially state law regarding the privacy rights of minors." "I want to see that video immediately," I said, before Jessica could respond to the principal's request. "In fact, I insist on reviewing the footage before any statements are taken or any disciplinary decisions are made. The recording will show exactly what happened, who initiated each phase of the confrontation, and how I responded to clear criminal assault. The evidence will speak for itself and vindicate my actions completely." My confidence in making this request was based on absolute certainty that the video would support my version of events while exposing Tyler's claims as fabrications designed to avoid responsibility for his actions. The footage would show his coordinated assault, my repeated attempts at de-escalation, his escalating aggression, and my minimal but effective response to what was clearly criminal behavior by multiple students. The video review took place in Principal Williams's office with the school district's legal counsel participating via speakerphone and the superintendent monitoring the proceedings through a secure video conference connection. What the recording revealed was unambiguous, comprehensive, and completely damning for Tyler's version of events, while providing clear evidence that my response had been appropriate and necessary. The footage captured Tyler's coordinated chalk assault from multiple angles, showing the deliberate and malicious nature of the attack, as well as the immediate danger it posed to my health and safety. It documented my verbal warnings and attempts at peaceful resolution, Tyler's mocking rejection of those attempts, and his decision to escalate to thrown projectiles aimed directly at my face with intent to cause injury. Most importantly, the video showed that my physical response had been defensive rather than aggressive, proportional rather than excessive, and designed to neutralize threats rather than inflict punishment. The techniques I had used were clearly controlled applications of force intended to stop harmful behavior rather than cause unnecessary injury to the students involved. Ms. Chen, the district's legal counsel, said through the speakerphone after reviewing the footage twice and consulting with colleagues, "Your response appears to have been entirely appropriate, legally justified, and consistent with your right to defend yourself from criminal assault. The student's behavior clearly constitutes coordinated attack on a school employee, which is classified as a felony under state law. We'll be recommending that criminal charges be filed in addition to whatever school disciplinary measures are deemed appropriate." Tyler's grandmother arrived at the school 40 minutes later, called away from her afternoon television programs, and confused about why her presence was suddenly required at her grandson's school in the middle of a weekday. The conversation with Principal Williams was heartbreaking, as the elderly woman struggled to understand that her beloved grandson had been systematically attacking teachers and would be facing serious consequences that could affect his entire future. "Tyler's such a good boy at home," she insisted, her hands shaking as she tried to process information that contradicted everything she thought she knew about her grandson's character and behavior. "He helps me with my groceries every week. He walks me to church on Sundays and sits with me during the entire service. He reads to me when my eyes are too tired to see the words clearly. There must be some terrible mistake. Tyler would never hurt a teacher. Tyler would never hurt anyone." The contrast between Tyler's behavior at home and his conduct at school revealed the sophisticated way he had learned to compartmentalize his personality and manipulate different audiences for maximum benefit. The respectful grandson who assisted his elderly caregiver was the same person who had spent weeks terrorizing teachers and students, demonstrating a level of social intelligence and strategic thinking that was both impressive and deeply disturbing. Marcus Rivera and Devin Walsh's parents arrived together approximately an hour later, both sets looking exhausted and frustrated by yet another emergency call from the school about their son's behavior. Unlike Tyler's grandmother, these parents were not surprised by the allegations or shocked by reports of coordinated aggression and assault. They had been dealing with escalating reports of misconduct, disrespect, and violence for months. "We've tried everything we can think of," Marcus's mother explained to Principal Williams, her voice carrying the defeat of someone who had exhausted all conventional parenting strategies without achieving meaningful behavioral change. Individual therapy, family counseling, medication trials, consequences, rewards, changing schools, homeschooling for an entire semester. Nothing works for more than a few weeks. Marcus seems determined to destroy every opportunity he's given, and honestly, we don't know what else to do. Devin's parents shared similar stories of unsuccessful interventions, failed treatments, and mounting frustration with their son's apparent commitment to destructive behavior. Both families had spent thousands of dollars on professional help and countless hours implementing behavioral modification strategies, but their sons continued to seek out trouble and create chaos wherever they went. Jessica Kim's parents presented an entirely different challenge when they arrived at the school. Her father came directly from his law office, still wearing an expensive business suit, and immediately began making demands about evidence preservation, witness testimony, and his daughter's rights as a minor who had been subjected to what he initially characterized as teacher violence and institutional misconduct. Her mother arrived separately, clutching a tablet containing legal research she had conducted during her drive to the school. She was prepared to challenge every aspect of the school's disciplinary process and had already contacted colleagues who specialized in educational law and civil rights violations. Their approach was aggressive, sophisticated, and designed to intimidate school officials into minimizing consequences for their daughter's participation in the assault. "My daughter was documenting evidence of serious teacher misconduct," Jessica's father announced before Principal Williams could explain the actual situation. If this teacher has physically assaulted students in response to normal classroom disruption, Jessica's video recording might be the only protection these children have against a dangerous adult who clearly has no business working with young people. The legal positioning and intimidation tactics lasted exactly as long as it took for Jessica's parents to review their daughter's video recording under the supervision of school officials. The footage made it impossible to characterize Tyler's crew as innocent victims or my response as excessive force or unprovoked aggression. What they witnessed was clear documentation of coordinated criminal assault, followed by textbook defensive techniques that protected both me and the other students in the classroom. The transformation in Jessica's parents' attitude was immediate and dramatic. The aggressive demands for accountability became quiet requests for leniency. The threats of lawsuits became expressions of gratitude that their daughter hadn't been seriously injured during the confrontation. The characterizations of teacher misconduct became acknowledgments that their daughter had been involved in criminal behavior that could have resulted in much more severe consequences. The formal disciplinary process took 3 days to complete, involving statements from multiple witnesses, review of prior incidents and behavioral patterns, consultation with legal experts, coordination with local law enforcement, and careful consideration of precedents and policies. The outcome was swift, comprehensive, and designed to send a clear message about institutional expectations and consequences. Tyler Brooks, Marcus Rivera, and Devin Walsh were immediately expelled from Lincoln Middle School and enrolled in the district's alternative education program for students who pose documented safety risks to traditional school environments. The alternative program was designed specifically for adolescents whose behavioral problems made them unsuitable for regular educational settings, featuring smaller class sizes, enhanced security measures, and intensive behavioral modification protocols. Criminal charges were filed against all 3 boys for assault on a school employee, with additional charges of conspiracy in creating a hostile educational environment. The charges were serious enough to require juvenile court proceedings and could result in detention time, mandatory counseling, probation supervision, and permanent criminal records that would affect their opportunities for higher education, employment, and military service. Jessica Kim avoided criminal charges due to her role as documentarian rather than active participant in the physical assault, but she received a 10-day suspension and was required to complete 50 hours of community service focused on conflict resolution and anti-bullying education. Her parents' threats of legal action evaporated completely when they realized that their daughter's recording actually provided evidence of her complicity in a coordinated attack on a teacher. The aftermath of what students immediately dubbed Chalk Day created ripple effects throughout Lincoln Middle School that nobody had anticipated or prepared for. Teachers who had been struggling with classroom management and student respect suddenly found their authority reinforced by the knowledge that the administration would support appropriate defensive actions when support became necessary. Students who had been living in fear of Tyler's crew and other bullying groups discovered that predatory behavior actually carried meaningful consequences when adults possessed both the skills and the determination to enforce institutional standards. The culture of intimidation that had characterized much of the school's social dynamics began to shift toward more respectful and productive interactions. Emma Rodriguez thanked me during lunch the following week, her relief evident as she described how dramatically her teaching experience had improved since Tyler's removal from the building. "The change has been incredible," she told me, looking more relaxed and confident than I had seen her since arriving at Lincoln. Not just because Tyler himself is gone, but because every student in this building now understands that harassment and intimidation will be met with immediate and effective consequences. Mrs. Grace Thompson's perspective was shaped by 3 decades of watching educational trends cycle through various approaches to discipline, authority, and student behavior management. "What you did was not only necessary but overdue," she told me during a quiet conversation in the teacher's lounge. "Tyler Brooks was heading towards serious legal trouble regardless of what happened in your classroom. The question was whether he would learn about consequences from someone who cared enough about his future to use minimal force, or whether he would eventually encounter police officers or correctional officials who would be far less concerned about his well-being." The community response to the incident was overwhelmingly positive, though not entirely unanimous. Parents who had been frustrated by their children's reports of classroom chaos and institutional powerlessness expressed gratitude that someone had finally established meaningful boundaries and demonstrated that educational environments could be protected from disruptive behavior. The local newspaper ran a comprehensive story about teacher safety, classroom management challenges, and the complex decisions that arise when traditional disciplinary measures prove inadequate for addressing systematic harassment and coordinated assault. The article included interviews with education experts, legal authorities, and community leaders who supported institutional responses that prioritize learning environments over protection of disruptive behavior. However, a small but vocal group of parents and community activists criticized my response as excessive force and argued that physical intervention should never be an option in educational settings, regardless of the circumstances or the level of threat posed by student behavior. They organized a petition demanding my termination and held a protest outside the school administration building. The controversy reached its peak during a packed school board meeting where community members debated the appropriate boundaries of teacher authority, student discipline, and institutional responsibility for maintaining safe learning environments. Supporters argued that teachers have both the right and the obligation to defend themselves and their students from criminal assault. Critics argued that any physical contact between teachers and students creates dangerous precedents and normalizes violence as a solution to behavioral problems. The debate was ultimately resolved by an unexpected voice that provided crucial perspective on Tyler's long-term behavioral patterns and their impact on multiple generations of Lincoln Middle School students. Luna Park, who had graduated from Lincoln 5 years earlier, requested permission to address the school board about her own experiences with Tyler Brooks and the systemic harassment that had characterized his approach to peer relationships since elementary school. Tyler Brooks sexually harassed me when I was in 7th grade, and he was in 6th, Luna told the packed auditorium, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her testimony. He followed me home from school multiple times, made inappropriate comments about my developing body, and threatened to spread rumors about me if I reported his behavior to adults. When I finally told my parents and they contacted the school, Tyler received a single day of in-school suspension and was told to avoid contact with me. Luna's testimony opened floodgates of similar stories from other former students and their parents. A pattern emerged of escalating behavioral problems that had been consistently minimized by previous administrations, with Tyler's actions being characterized as normal adolescent misbehavior rather than predatory conduct that required serious intervention and meaningful consequences. Ms. Chen accomplished what the adults in my life should have done when I was being harassed, Luna concluded, looking directly at the school board members who would decide my professional fate. She demonstrated that predatory behavior will be met with immediate and appropriate consequences, and that adults who are responsible for protecting young people actually possess the skills and determination to fulfill that responsibility when protection becomes necessary. The school board voted unanimously to support my actions and retain me as a teacher, accompanied by a formal policy clarification stating that teachers have the right to use reasonable defensive force when attacked by students, and that such defensive actions would be evaluated based on the totality of circumstances rather than a blanket prohibition against physical contact. Tyler Brooks spent 6 months in a juvenile detention center before being released to a specialized group home that focused on adolescents with behavioral disorders and histories of aggressive conduct. The therapeutic intervention was more intensive and comprehensive than anything he had received previously, addressing not just his destructive behavior but the underlying trauma, abandonment issues, and powerlessness that had contributed to his need to control others through intimidation and violence. The treatment program was designed specifically for young people whose early experiences had taught them that aggression was the only reliable method for achieving control and respect in relationships with others. Tyler participated in individual therapy, group counseling, family systems work with his grandmother, and structured activities designed to help him understand the connection between his father's abandonment, his mother's emotional absence, and his own desperate attempts to establish dominance over adult authority figures. Marcus Rivera and Devin Walsh received probation and mandatory counseling, with their sentences structured to keep them in their families and communities while providing intensive support for behavioral change and personal growth. Both boys participated in anger management programs, conflict resolution training, and community service projects designed to help them understand the impact of their actions on others. Marcus discovered an unexpected talent for artistic expression during his community service at a local senior center, where he created murals depicting the journey from anger and violence toward healing and positive contribution. His artwork became a powerful tool for helping other young people visualize the possibility of transformation and growth beyond their current behavioral patterns. Devin found his path through structured athletics, joining a boxing program that emphasized discipline, respect, controlled aggression, and channeling physical energy into productive competition rather than destructive violence. The sport provided him with legitimate outlets for his intensity while teaching him the difference between controlled force used for positive purposes and random aggression used to intimidate others. The most surprising development in the entire aftermath came 18 months later, when Tyler Brooks requested a meeting with me through his therapist and group home supervisor. The young man who walked into the conference room at the Juvenile Services Building was dramatically and fundamentally different from the aggressive teenager who had terrorized my classroom and made education impossible for 25 students. The swagger was completely gone, replaced by genuine humility and what appeared to be authentic remorse for his actions and their impact on multiple people over several years. Tyler had gained weight in a healthy way, his posture was more relaxed and less defensive, and his eyes showed a clarity and focus that had been completely absent during his time as a predator and intimidator. "Miss Chen," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper as he struggled with words that didn't come easily but represented genuine growth and understanding. "I want to apologize for what I did to you and to all the other teachers and students I hurt over the years. I know that saying I'm sorry doesn't fix anything or take back the damage I caused, but I needed you to know that I understand now how wrong I was, and how much pain I created for people who were just trying to help me or learn in peace." The conversation that followed was one of the most meaningful and encouraging of my entire teaching career. Tyler described the therapeutic process that had helped him understand the connections between his father's abandonment, his mother's emotional unavailability, his grandmother's cognitive decline, and his own desperate attempts to establish control and dominance through systematic harassment of authority figures and vulnerable peers. He had learned to recognize the patterns and triggers that preceded his aggressive episodes, developed healthy coping strategies for dealing with feelings of powerlessness and abandonment, and begun to understand that his need to control others had been a symptom of his complete lack of control over the circumstances that had shaped his early life experiences. "The thing that I understand now," Tyler continued, looking directly at me for the first time since entering the room, "is that you were the first adult who ever showed me that my actions would have real and immediate consequences. Every other teacher, counselor, and administrator just absorbed my behavior or gave me meaningless punishments that didn't change anything about my situation or my choices." Tyler went on to explain that the shock of encountering someone who could neutralize his aggression instantly and effectively had been the beginning of his recovery process and personal transformation. For the first time in his life, he had met an adult who possessed both the strength to stop his harmful behavior and the restraint to use only the minimum force necessary to achieve that protective goal. "I hated you for a really long time," Tyler admitted, his honesty painful but necessary for his continued growth and healing. "But my therapist helped me understand that what I really hated was finally meeting someone who wouldn't let me get away with hurting people just because I was angry about things that had happened to me. You treated me like I was responsible for my choices and capable of making better ones, and nobody had ever done that before." Tyler's transformation continued through high school, where he became an active participant in anti-bullying programs and served as a peer counselor for students struggling with behavioral issues and family problems. He used his own experience to help other young people understand the connection between personal trauma and aggressive behavior, showing them that healing and positive change were possible, but required genuine accountability for harmful actions and sustained commitment to personal growth. Marcus Rivera's artistic journey led him to a scholarship at a local community college, where he studied graphic design while continuing to create murals and installations that depicted themes of redemption, transformation, and the possibility of positive change even after serious mistakes. His work became part of a traveling exhibition about juvenile justice and rehabilitation that was displayed in schools, community centers, and correctional facilities throughout the state. Devin Walsh's involvement in boxing evolved into coaching and mentoring younger athletes, teaching them not just technical skills but also discipline, respect, and the importance of channeling physical energy into constructive rather than destructive activities. He earned his high school diploma through the alternative education program and went on to study exercise science at a state university, with plans to work in therapeutic recreation with at-risk youth. Jessica Kim's trajectory proved more complex and challenging, primarily due to her parents' initial response to her involvement in the classroom assault. Their immediate focus on protecting her from consequences rather than helping her understand the impact of her actions delayed her process of taking genuine responsibility for her role in the systematic harassment campaign and its escalation to physical violence. However, the community service requirement proved unexpectedly transformative in ways that traditional punishment might not have achieved. Working with elderly residents at a local nursing home, Jessica encountered people who reminded her of Tyler's grandmother and began to understand how her documentation and encouragement of bullying behavior had contributed to real harm against vulnerable individuals who deserved protection rather than exploitation. The elderly residents shared stories of their own experiences with bullying, discrimination, and abuse, helping Jessica understand that her role as documentarian and social media distributor had amplified the harm caused by Tyler's crew while creating permanent records that could be used to humiliate and intimidate victims long after the original incidents had ended. Jessica eventually became an advocate for responsible social media use and digital citizenship, speaking to middle school and high school students about the long-term consequences of recording and sharing content that depicts harassment, violence, or exploitation of others. Her presentations emphasized the legal, ethical, and personal implications of becoming complicit in harmful behavior through documentation and distribution. The ripple effects of Chalk Day extended far beyond the individuals directly involved in the confrontation, creating lasting changes in institutional policies, community expectations, and educational practices throughout the district and beyond. Lincoln Middle School implemented comprehensive anti-bullying programs that addressed not just individual incidents, but the cultural and environmental factors that allow harassment and intimidation to flourish in educational settings. Teachers throughout the district received training in recognizing escalation patterns, implementing de-escalation techniques, understanding their legal rights and responsibilities regarding defensive force, and developing classroom management strategies that prevent behavioral problems from reaching crisis levels. The training emphasized the importance of early intervention. Had taught me to read aggression, anticipate attacks, and respond with devastating efficiency, but my years of teacher training had taught me that those skills were absolutely forbidden in my new professional environment. Tyler's psychological profile was becoming clearer with each passing day. He operated like a strategic fighter, probing for weaknesses while maintaining defensive positioning that protected him from counterattack. His choice to sit in the back corner wasn't random. It gave him maximum visibility of the entire classroom while minimizing my ability to approach him without obvious intent. His timing of disruptions followed patterns I recognized from studying competition footage, attacking during moments of transition when his target was most vulnerable and least able to respond effectively. Marcus Rivera functioned as Tyler's primary training partner, the loyal sparring partner who helped him refine his techniques and provided backup when situations escalated beyond his individual capabilities. Marcus lacked Tyler's strategic thinking but possessed better reflexes and more natural aggression, making him dangerous in a different way. He was the kind of fighter who would charge forward without thinking, relying on momentum and surprise rather than technique and positioning. Devin Walsh played the role I had seen countless times in team training environments, the enthusiastic student who amplified his teacher's energy and provided social reinforcement for increasingly risky behavior. Devin was Tyler's audience, the validation that made the performance worthwhile. Without Devin's laughter and admiration, Tyler's disruptions would lose their social currency and become simple rule violations, rather than entertaining spectacles. Jessica Kim represented the most sophisticated element of their operation, the documentarian whose recording and sharing capabilities transformed classroom incidents into social media content. She understood that modern conflicts extend far beyond their immediate physical boundaries, that public perception and viral distribution could determine winners and losers long after the original confrontation ended. Jessica was building Tyler's highlight reel while simultaneously creating evidence that could be edited to support whatever narrative served their purposes. My father had warned me about opponents like Tyler during my competitive years. Some fighters are naturally gifted, he had told me after a particularly difficult tournament where I faced an opponent who seemed to anticipate my every move. They read body language, understand timing, and possess an intuitive grasp of psychological warfare that can't be taught. The mistake most people make is trying to outfight these opponents on their terms. The key is recognizing that their greatest strength can become their greatest weakness if you understand how to redirect it. Tyler's greatest strength was his ability to operate within the margins of acceptable behavior, pushing boundaries without crossing lines that would trigger immediate administrative consequences. He had perfected the art of plausible deniability, creating situations where his victims looked unreasonable for complaining about behavior that appeared harmless to outside observers. This was precisely the kind of strategic thinking that made him dangerous. But it was also the kind of rigid, tactical approach that could be exploited by someone who understood his patterns. The revelation that changed my entire perspective came during a faculty meeting in our 5th week together. Principal Williams was discussing the upcoming parent-teacher conferences when she mentioned Tyler's family situation in more detail. His father wasn't just absent. He was serving a 15-year sentence for armed robbery and assault. His mother worked double shifts at 2 different factories to keep the family afloat, leaving Tyler's care to his paternal grandmother, who was in the early stages of Alzheimer's disease and frequently forgot that she was supposed to be supervising a teenager. Tyler wasn't just acting out for entertainment or social status. He was setting appropriate limits on harmful conduct. The classroom where everything happened has been renovated and redecorated multiple times, but the lessons learned there continue to resonate throughout Lincoln Middle School and the broader educational community. Teachers know they work in an environment where their safety and authority are supported by administrators who understand that effective education requires clear boundaries and consistent enforcement of behavioral expectations. Students understand they attend a school where bullying, harassment, and intimidation will be met with swift and decisive consequences, where vulnerable individuals will be protected from predatory behavior, and where the learning environment is maintained by adults who possess both the skills and the determination to ensure that education can proceed without interference from those who choose aggression over cooperation. Parents know their children are learning in an environment where responsible adults will protect students from harmful peer behavior, while teaching valuable lessons about respect, consequences, and the importance of making positive choices even when faced with difficult circumstances or challenging social dynamics. The story of Chalk Day continues to evolve as the young people involved mature into adults who carry its lessons into their own relationships, careers, communities, and eventually their roles as parents and community leaders. They learned through direct experience that actions have consequences, that strength without restraint becomes destructive, that adults who genuinely care about young people will enforce the standards that make growth and learning possible, and that sometimes the most important education happens in moments of crisis, when everyone discovers what they're truly capable of becoming. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.